My boss demanded more than work for a promotion, but I exposed him with proof. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Clara Bennett, and for years I poured everything I had into my job at Brightwell and Company, a mid-sized advertising firm. I stayed late when others went home, I gave up weekends to make sure deadlines were met, and I carried more than my share of the load. I wasn't chasing glory. I just wanted to earn the respect I knew I deserved. More than anything, I wanted the promotion to project manager. It was the next step, the reward for years of hard work, and I believed I was right on the edge of finally getting it. At the office, people often came to me when they needed something fixed. I was the one who kept things running when projects were about to fall apart. It wasn't easy, but I told myself it would be worth it in the end. Every late night, every missed dinner with family, every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, I believed it was an investment in my future. The man standing between me and that future was my boss, Richard Dalton. To the higher-ups, he was smooth, confident, and charming. He knew how to make executives laugh, how to take credit at the right moments, and how to present himself as the picture of leadership. But those of us who worked under him knew the truth. Behind the closed office door, Rick was a very different man. He played favorites shamelessly, giving easier workloads and better projects to the people who flattered him or bent to his demand. He had a way of talking down to others, making cruel jokes at someone's expense just to show he was in control. Whispers circulated about how certain people managed to rise so quickly under him, but no one ever dared to say it out loud. I kept telling myself that if I worked hard enough, he couldn't ignore me forever. I thought that my results would speak louder than anything else. I thought that no matter what kind of man he was, my effort and loyalty would win out in the end. I was wrong. The day came when Rick finally called me into his office. I walked in with my heart pounding, convinced this was the moment I had been waiting for, that all my years of sacrifice were about to pay off. He closed the door behind me, sat back in his chair, and smiled in that way that never reached his eyes. That was the moment I realized just how far he was willing to go, and just how much I was about to lose, or fight to protect. The office was almost empty that evening. Most of the lights were off, the halls were quiet, and I was still at my desk finishing a report when my phone buzzed with a message from Rick. He told me to come to his office. I pushed back my chair, smoothed down my blouse, and walked slowly down the hallway. When I reached his door, I noticed it was shut. I paused, then knocked. His voice came through, low and calm. "Come in." I stepped inside. The room felt different from how it did during the day. The blinds were drawn, the lamp on his desk was the only light, and the air felt heavier, like it carried something unsaid. Rick leaned back in his chair, a glass of water in his hand, watching me. "Clara," he said smoothly, waving for me to sit. "I've been meaning to have this talk with you." My heart sped up. I thought this was finally the moment, the recognition I had been waiting for after all the long nights and weekends. I sat down carefully, my hands folded in my lap, trying to steady myself. Rick let the silence stretch before he spoke again. "I've noticed how hard you've been working. Long hours, tough projects. You've been carrying more than your share." I nodded slightly. "I care about the work. I want to do well here." "That's good," he said, leaning forward, elbows on the desk. "That's exactly what I like to hear." I waited for him to continue, for the words I had been desperate to hear, that I was being promoted. But instead his voice dropped, almost like he was sharing a secret. "Now, let's be honest, Clara. The project manager role you've been chasing, you're right there. You've earned your place at the front of the line." He paused, letting the words linger before adding, "But you and I both know that around here, effort isn't the only thing that counts." I frowned, unsure what he was getting at. "I thought it was based on results," I said carefully. Rick gave a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Results matter, sure. But that's not how things always work. Some people here understand what it takes to move forward. They know how to play the game. Sometimes it's not just about the hours you put in. Sometimes it's about what you're willing to give outside of work." The meaning hit me like ice water. I froze in my chair, staring at him. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice low, tight with disbelief. He smiled as though this was nothing unusual. "I'm offering you a chance, Clara. If you really want that promotion, you'll need to show me you can be loyal in more ways than one." I felt my stomach turn. All the late nights, all the sacrifices, all the pride I had in my work, it meant nothing to him. He wasn't talking about my effort or my ability. He was talking about something else entirely, something dirty. "I'm not doing that," I said firmly, my voice sharper than I expected. "If that's what it takes, I don't want it." Rick leaned back in his chair again, still smiling, but his eyes hardened. "Suit yourself," he said calmly. "But don't be surprised when others who know how to play the game start moving ahead of you." I got up from the chair, my hands shaking, and walked out of his office without another word. My chest felt heavy, but under the shock and disgust, something else started to burn inside me. He thought he could scare me into silence, but he was wrong. The change started the very next day. I walked into the office expecting things to be normal, but it was like someone had flipped a switch overnight. Suddenly, all the projects I had been managing were taken away and replaced with small, meaningless tasks. I was asked to file papers, run errands, and handle spreadsheets that no one else wanted to touch. Work that usually went to interns was now being pushed onto me. It felt deliberate, like Rick had gone out of his way to remind me that he controlled what I did and what I didn't. It didn't stop there. Meetings I had always been included in were suddenly happening without me. I would see a group of people walking into the conference room, some of them with files I had prepared, and when I asked about it later, someone would casually say, "Oh, sorry, Rick said you didn't need to be there." My stomach would tighten every time. Those were meetings where decisions were made, where promotions were earned, where voices were heard. Without being in them, I was invisible. The worst part was how he treated me in front of others. If I spoke up during team discussions, Rick would interrupt me or dismiss my ideas as if they weren't worth hearing. If I sent him a draft of something, he would point out minor mistakes loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, smirking while my face burned with embarrassment. It wasn't just about making me work harder. He wanted me to feel small. I might have been able to handle that if it was just about me, but then came Madison. She was one of the newer employees, young, fresh out of school, still learning how the office worked. Suddenly, Rick was pulling her into meetings, giving her the projects I had been pushing for, praising her in front of the team for work that wasn't even hers alone. I watched her get chances that I had been waiting on for years, and I knew why. She laughed at Rick's jokes a little too hard, stood too close when he spoke, and never argued when he placed his hand lightly on her back as they walked into meetings together. It wasn't her fault. She was caught in his game just like everyone else, but watching it happen made me sick. Every smile he gave her, every compliment he tossed her way, was a reminder that my refusal had cost me everything I had worked for. It didn't matter that I had stayed late, carried entire projects, or proven myself again and again. None of it counted anymore. By the end of the week, I felt like I was drowning. I would sit at my desk, staring at piles of busy work, while hearing laughter and conversations from behind the glass doors of meetings I used to attend. People I had trained were now being treated as more valuable. My confidence, which I had built carefully over the years, was being chipped away piece by piece. I felt trapped. Quitting crossed my mind more than once, but the thought of walking away without a fight made me just as angry as it did sad. I had given too much to let him destroy me this easily. Still, every time I walked into that office, I felt smaller, humiliated by the way he paraded his power. I knew what he was doing, and I knew why, but I had no idea yet how I was going to stop him. I couldn't keep everything bottled up any longer. The constant pressure, the humiliation, the way Rick had stripped me of everything I had worked for, it was eating me alive. One afternoon, after another long day of meaningless tasks, I found myself standing by the coffee machine, staring blankly at the floor. That's when Dan walked in. Dan worked in finance. He wasn't flashy like some of the others in the office, but he was steady, reliable, and sharp. Over time, we had built a quiet friendship, sharing small complaints and occasional laughs during breaks. He noticed the look on my face right away. "You look like you're carrying the whole building on your shoulders," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. I let out a tired laugh. "Feels like it." I hesitated, then asked, "Do you have a minute?" He nodded, and we found an empty break room. I closed the door behind us, my hands trembling a little. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I should say anything. Talking about Rick felt dangerous, like inviting trouble, but I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I took a deep breath. "Dan, something's been happening with Rick." He looked at me, serious now. "Go on." I told him about the meeting in Rick's office, the proposition, the way everything had changed since I refused. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. When I finished, there was a long silence. I braced myself for doubt or disbelief. But Dan didn't look surprised. He looked angry. He set his coffee cup down hard on the table and leaned back. "You're not the first," he said quietly. I blinked. "What do you mean?" He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "I've worked here long enough to see the pattern. Rick has pulled this before. Different women, same game. Some of them left. Others, well, they didn't leave, but they stopped looking anyone in the eye. Nobody ever talks about it because they're scared of him." My stomach tightened. I had thought it was just me, that I had been singled out, unlucky enough to catch his attention. Hearing that this was something he had done before made my skin crawl. He wasn't just abusing his power with me. He had been doing it all along. "So everyone knows?" I asked, my voice bitter. "People know enough," Dan said. "But no one wants to be the one to say it out loud. They think it's safer to look away." I sat back in my chair, stunned. My anger grew hotter. It wasn't just about my promotion anymore. It wasn't even just about me. Rick was a predator, and he had been getting away with it for years because people were too afraid to challenge him. Dan must have seen the look on my face, because he leaned forward. If you want to fight him, you'll need proof. Real proof. Something he can't talk his way out of. The idea scared me, but I nodded. How? We'll figure it out, he said firmly. But you can't do this alone. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of strength return. I wasn't just a victim anymore, and I wasn't alone. Rick had been careful, but I knew if I stayed quiet, he would just keep preying on others. Sitting there with Dan, I made up my mind. If Rick thought I would let him destroy me, he was about to learn how wrong he was. The big presentation was supposed to be my chance to prove myself again. I had been working for weeks to prepare, checking every number, every slide, every word I was going to say. It was a meeting with senior executives, the kind of moment that could make or break someone's reputation. I wanted badly to get it right, to remind everyone in that room that I was capable of much more than the busy work I had been buried under lately. When I walked into the conference room, the tension in my chest was tight, but I felt ready. The table was filled with sharp suits, faces that didn't often look my way. I set my laptop up, plugged in the projector, and started my presentation. For the first few minutes, things went smoothly. I spoke clearly, moved through the slides with confidence, and felt like the room was paying attention. Then the questions started. One of the executives interrupted me, frowning at the screen. These numbers don't match what we have on file. Where did you get this data? My throat went dry. I looked at the chart, confused, because I had checked it so many times. I stammered, trying to explain, flipping back through my notes. Another executive pointed out another inconsistency. My slides were wrong. Not just one chart, but several. The more they spoke, the hotter my face felt, until I could barely meet their eyes. Rick sat at the end of the table, arms crossed, watching me with the faintest smile. He didn't step in to help. He didn't clarify or offer support. He let me drown. By the time I finished, the executives looked irritated and disappointed. The meeting ended quickly, and people filed out with clipped words and polite but cold expressions. My chest ached as I shut my laptop and packed my things, fighting the urge to run out of the room. When everyone else was gone, Rick walked over. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned close enough so only I could hear him. You could have avoided this if you weren't so stubborn, he murmured, his smile sharp and cruel. Remember that. I stared at him, unable to speak, my hands shaking. He turned and left as if nothing had happened, leaving me alone in the empty conference room. I held myself together until I reached the parking garage. Once I was in my car, the tears came hard. I gripped the steering wheel, gasping, my chest tight with shame. I replayed the presentation in my head over and over. The looks on their faces, the way my voice cracked, the humiliation of standing there like a fool while everyone judged me. I had worked so hard, and he had set me up to fail. But as the sobs slowed, something inside me shifted. Beneath the hurt, beneath the humiliation, another feeling started to rise. Anger, pure and sharp. He thought he had broken me, but what he really did was wake something I had been holding back. By the time I wiped my face and started the car, I knew one thing for sure. I was done letting him pull the strings. I was done being his victim. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed his words in my head. You could have avoided this. No. The only thing I needed to avoid was staying silent. From that moment on, I promised myself I was going to fight back. After that horrible day, I knew I couldn't just sit and take it anymore. I had to be smart. Rick was careful in public, but I was starting to see that he trusted himself too much. If I wanted to stop him, I needed proof he couldn't deny. The first thing I did was start writing everything down. Every email he sent me, every assignment he gave, every little remark, I saved it all. I created a private folder where I kept copies of documents, notes, and even the strange schedules he gave me. I made sure there was a record of every single thing, no matter how small. At first it felt pointless, like piling up scraps, but I told myself those scraps could turn into something big. When I told Dan what I was doing, he nodded like he had already been expecting it. That's the right start, he said. Then he leaned closer and added, but you're going to need more than paperwork. You'll need his voice. His words. That thought scared me. Recording him felt dangerous, like walking a tightrope with no net. But Dan didn't flinch. A few days later, he handed me a small device that looked like a regular pen. It's simple, he said. Click the top once to record, click again to stop. Keep it with you when you meet him. If he slips, you'll have it. I held that pen like it was heavier than it really was. Just knowing I had it gave me a strange mix of fear and power. To make it work, I had to change how I acted around Rick. Instead of shutting him down cold every time, I started giving him small hints that I wasn't so firm anymore. A softer tone when I answered him, a forced smile, a pause instead of a quick refusal. It made my skin crawl, but I needed him to believe I was reconsidering. And it worked. He started leaning closer when he spoke to me. He let little comments slip out during conversations, the kind of things he never would have said before. At first it was light, jokes that weren't funny, hints about opportunities if I was smart. But then it grew. He became more open, more confident, as if he believed I was folding under his pressure. Each time, I clicked the pen in my pocket and let it capture everything. His voice, his promises, his disgusting little hints. I kept my face calm, pretending like I didn't care, but inside I was boiling. He thought he had me under his control. He thought I was finally giving in. But the truth was the opposite. The more careless he became, the more power I gained. Every word he spoke was another thread in the net I was weaving around him. He didn't see it, not yet. And that gave me the one advantage I needed. I was playing his game better than he was. The next few weeks felt like a balancing act. On the surface, I went to work as if nothing had changed. I smiled when I had to, kept my head down when he spoke, and played the role of someone who was finally starting to bend. Inside, I was on edge every second, waiting for him to slip. And he did, over and over. The first recording came in his office. He leaned back in his chair, grinning, and told me, "You know, Clara, people who give me what I need, I always take care of them. Promotions, bonuses, all of it." My hands tightened in my lap, but I stayed calm, letting the pen in my pocket catch every word. Another time, he cornered me after a meeting. His voice dropped so low only I could hear. "You're wasting your chances. You think anyone else here is going to reward you for saying no? Think again." I nodded slowly, pretending to consider his words, while inside I burned with anger. Later, listening to the recording alone, I heard the smugness in his tone. It made my skin crawl, but it also gave me power. I didn't stop with him. Dan was right. I needed more than my own story. Quietly, I started reaching out to a few women I trusted in the office. At first, they hesitated, glancing around nervously before shaking their heads. But when I explained that I was keeping records, that I wasn't afraid anymore, a few finally opened up. One woman told me about how Rick had cornered her at a work event, whispering the same kinds of promises he had made to me. Another admitted she had left an important project because she couldn't handle his pressure anymore. Their voices were shaky, their words rushed, but they gave me what I needed. I wrote everything down, date by date, detail by detail. Some even agreed to send me emails or notes they had kept to themselves. Every night when I got home, I spread everything out on my dining table. Recordings, notes, printed emails, testimonies. At first it looked like a mess, but slowly it began to take shape. Each cruel remark, each hint of his game, each story from someone else, it all connected. The picture was clear. This wasn't just about me. Rick had been abusing his power for years, and I was building the story of it piece by piece. There were moments when fear crept in. I worried about what would happen if he caught me, if he realized what I was doing. But then I would replay his words, listen again to the smug way he threatened my career, and the fear hardened into resolve. The risk was worth it. By the end of those weeks, the folder on my computer and the stack of papers on my table had grown into something solid. I didn't just have suspicions anymore. I had proof. His voice, his threats, his pattern of targeting women who just wanted to do their jobs. I knew I wasn't ready to confront him yet, but I also knew the day was coming. Piece by piece, I was building a case he couldn't escape. He thought he still had me under his thumb, but really, I was the one tightening the grip. I knew I needed one last piece, something so clear and undeniable that no one could twist it around. All the notes, all the testimonies, all the little recordings were strong, but I wanted his words spoken plainly. I wanted him to trap himself, so I set it up. I walked into his office one afternoon and asked if we could talk privately. I softened my voice, lowered my eyes a little, and let just enough hesitation show to make it believable. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him. His smile came instantly, like he had been waiting for this moment. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms like he had already won. "I knew you'd come around," he said, smug as ever. "I knew you weren't as stubborn as you pretended." I sat down across from him, sliding the recorder pen into place on the folder in my lap. My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it, but I forced myself to stay calm. I let him talk. He leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "Here's how it works, Clara. You prove your loyalty to me, and I'll make sure that promotion is yours. Simple as that. People who play along always move ahead." Every word was crisp, captured perfectly. I nodded slowly, pretending to think it over, when inside I wanted to scream. Then he leaned closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. His fingers pressed just a little too firmly as he said, "Show me you're serious, and I'll take care of you." That was it. The exact thing I had been waiting for. His voice, his touch, his promise. It was all there, clear as day. I sat frozen for a second, the disgust crawling through my skin, but I forced myself not to jerk away. I needed him to believe I wasn't ready to walk out yet. I mumbled something about needing more time and stood up, keeping my movements steady. He smirked, clearly thinking he had me where he wanted. "Don't take too long," he said. "Opportunities don't wait forever." I walked out of his office with my head down, holding myself together until I was out of sight. My legs felt shaky, and I gripped the recorder so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I reached the bathroom, I locked myself in a stall and let out a shaky breath. For a moment, I felt sick to my stomach. The way he had touched me, the certainty in his voice, the way he believed I was giving in, it made me feel dirty and small. But then I remembered what I had just captured. The proof. The exact moment he had exposed himself. I wiped my face, stood tall, and walked out of that building with fire in my chest. He thought he was in control, but now I had everything I needed. Rick Dalton was cornered, and he didn't even know it. I didn't sleep much after getting that recording. Part of me wanted to run straight to HR, but I knew better. Rick had friends there, people who owed him favors. If I handed everything to them, they might bury it before it ever saw daylight. I needed to go higher, straight to the people who couldn't afford to ignore what I had. So I put everything together in one folder. Recordings, emails, notes, testimony. I organized it carefully, step by step, showing the pattern he had built over years. Then I asked for a private meeting with the company's legal department and the CEO's office. It felt terrifying, walking in with my folder clutched to my chest, but once I started speaking, I didn't stop. I laid out the entire story, piece by piece, and when they listened to the first recording, I saw their faces tighten. They knew it was serious. They called a boardroom meeting the very next week. I sat at the long table, hands folded, heart hammering, while the company's top leaders filled the seats. Rick walked in late, as usual, looking smug and sure of himself. He didn't even glance at me. He thought it was just another normal meeting where he'd charm his way through. The CEO opened the folder and pressed play on the first recording. Rick's voice filled the room, smooth, suggestive, unmistakable. "You prove your loyalty to me, and I'll make sure that promotion is yours." Rick froze. His smile faltered, then tried to come back, weak and shaky. This is out of context," he said, laughing nervously. But the next clip played, and then the next. Each one worse than the last. His promises, his threats, his insults, they all echoed in the quiet room. I didn't move. I sat still, staring at the table, while his voice exposed him. The leaders shifted in their seats, some frowning, some shaking their heads. Rick's usual charm was gone, stripped away by his own word. He started stammering, reaching for excuses. "She wanted this, she misunderstood. This is a setup." His voice grew louder, more desperate, but no one was nodding along. No one was buying it. The evidence was too clear, too sharp. Finally, he slammed his hand on the table, his face red. "This is ridiculous. You can't do this to me." But he already knew it was over. His mask had cracked wide open, and the man who always strutted around like he owned the place now looked small, cornered, powerless. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there calm, letting the proof speak louder than anything I could have said. For years, he had held power over others with threats and whispers. Now, his own voice had destroyed him. When the last recording stopped, the room was silent. Rick's shoulders slumped. He had no more words left. And for the first time since I had started working there, I felt like the balance of power had shifted for good. The decision came faster than I expected. The board didn't argue, didn't stall, didn't look for excuses. Rick was told to leave the building immediately. Security escorted him out, his face twisted with anger and shame. For a man who had always walked the halls with smug confidence, seeing him reduced to that broken state felt like the first real breath I'd taken in months. But it didn't stop there. The legal department launched a full investigation. With the evidence I had collected and the testimonies from others, it wasn't just about him losing his job. It became about accountability. He had built a career on intimidation and manipulation, and now it all came crashing down. Word spread quickly that lawsuits were being prepared, and Rick would have to answer for more than just what he did to me. The office atmosphere shifted almost overnight. People who had once kept their heads down began to look me in the eye. Some whispered quiet thank yous in the hall. Others stopped by my desk to say how much it meant that someone had finally done what they couldn't. I realized how many of them had been living under the same shadow, and how freeing it was for them to see it lifted. Not long after, I was called into a meeting with leadership. They told me I was being promoted to project manager. This time, there were no strings, no hidden costs. It was for my work, my dedication, and yes, for the courage to stand up when it mattered most. I accepted, not with the excitement I once imagined, but with a steady calm. The title mattered, but what mattered more was knowing I had broken something that had been hurting people for years. When I moved into my new office, I sat quietly for a while, looking at the view from the window. It wasn't joy over the promotion that filled me, it was relief. I thought about the women who had trusted me with their stories, about the nights I had sat at my table sorting through evidence, about the moment I had walked into that boardroom, not knowing how it would end. Now, I knew it had been worth it. Rick's power was gone. His cycle of abuse was over. And even though the scars of what he had done would linger for some, he would never use his position to corner or threaten anyone in that company. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight finally lift off my shoulders. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was peace. Some people say silence is easier, others say speaking up is the only way. Which side are you on? Let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.